tells us that Jesus heard this empowering, extraordinary message, not once, but twice. This is my own dear Son, with whom I am pleased. He absolutely needed to hear it, and so do we. He would be severely tested twice, and he heard his Father's affirmation and approval before each trial. We are tried and tested off and on. Our own Father's approval, clearly expressed, can make all the difference for us, one way or another. Most churches have a high percentage of females in the congregation, and ours is no exception. And on this Father's Day, I would like to share comments, reflections from 6 adult daughters and their families. They're brief, and I'll give you their ages after each one. And you can be thinking about your own situation. My father was the most important influence in my life. He made me believe that I could achieve anything if I worked hard enough. And he made me feel terribly attractive. Whenever I'd worry about ever getting a boyfriend, he'd laugh and say, "Are you kidding? I'll have to beat off the guys with a stick. You'll see." His whole approach was to make me feel good about myself. And most of the time, he succeeded. I think if fathers do nothing else, that's a great thing. Harriet, age 40. My father and I had so distant a relationship that after he died, I can honestly say I hardly ever gave him another thought. But I think of my mother often. I'll see the back of someone's head in a store and it will remind me of her, and I'll feel pain. My father was just so inaccessible. How can you miss somebody who was there but just wasn't a part of your life? Emily, 43. Family always came first for my father. When I was little, he would drive me to school every morning on his way to work. The day I started kindergarten, I was terrified. I took his hat so he couldn't leave. He peered through a glass door, waving and smiling every time I looked up at him. Finally, I started playing with the other kids and let go of the hat. He did that for 5 days in a row until I wasn't afraid anymore. And he could just drop me off. He never got annoyed, not once. That's my daddy, Millie, 43. One of my earliest memories of my father was when I was 4. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw these scary shapes on my window shade and screamed, "Daddy, Daddy!" He rushed in, sat on the edge of my bed, and explained that it was just the streetlight playing tricks and that everything was all right. He stayed with me until I fell back to sleep. I remember thinking, when I grow up, will I ever find a man as sweet and good and kind as my daddy? So far, I haven't. Carol, age 30. My father was the type who couldn't express love, only approval or disapproval. Once I got a B on a report card, and he said, "What's this?" I said, "Why don't you say anything about all the A's?" He said, "I expect that. I expect you to be perfect." The good news is that he trained me to be extremely capable, so I am very successful. I can take care of myself. The downside is that I am a driven workaholic. I can't make a mistake, and I'm always walking on eggs. One false move and it's all undone. I feel as if I'm only as good as my last accomplishment. Judy, age 43. I really had 4 relationships with my father. The first was when I was a little girl, and he just adored me. Then there were my teens, when he was always working, and when he was around, all we did was fight. Then, after I got married, we were sort of polite strangers. But the last relationship was when he was old and sick. That was quite different. He was so vulnerable that you couldn't do anything but love him. I really got his tenderness and who he was. His courage and his character came through. We came full circle. I felt such a completion. Sylvia, 51. Father's Day. Our fathers and us. That relationship has much to do with who we become, whether we're male or female. The sorting out of our feelings for our fathers is usually complicated, but it's also crucial. Very often it is a mixture of blessing and some betrayal. For some people, their father's nurture and influence is the greatest single strength in their lives. For others, it is a question of whether they can survive his abandonment or wounding of them at all. Sometimes we need to recruit a substitute to save us. If we are lucky, there is such a man available. We in turn can find ourselves becoming recruited as a saving stand-in. I believe we owe our fathers and ourselves at least one basic thing, one excellent effort, one enduring expedition. And that thing, that effort, that expedition is understanding. If we cannot or will not understand our own fathers, we are unlikely to understand ourselves. Understanding is not the same as forgiveness. If wounding or neglect was major in the mix, then we will have to have our anger before we can attempt forgiveness. If we insist on turning a blind eye to the faults of our fathers, we end up blaming ourselves and can become crippled. After the understanding, we are better able to sort out and size up him and ourselves. We can determine what to appreciate and celebrate, what to mourn and grieve. We can then see if we can offer ourselves what we needed that he could not give us. I'll close with one man's hard-won insights about his father and himself and his father of his own son. It's entitled, Once the Son, Now the Father, written for us by Bill Meade. One winter evening, as I sat reading, my young son Luke approached my chair and shy silence. I looked up from my paper, and he gave me his wide-open grin. Then his expression turned abruptly serious. "I broke my saw," he said, withdrawing the toy from behind his back. "Here." He didn't ask if I could fix it. His trust that I could was a compliment from a small boy to the miracle fixer of tricycles, wagons, and assorted toys. The saw's blue plastic handle had snapped. I said, "There are pieces missing. Do you have them?" He opened his clenched fist to reveal the remaining fragments. I did not see how the saw could be properly mended. He watched me patiently, intently, his expression revealing absolute confidence that I could do anything. That look stirred memories. I examined the saw with great care, turning over the broken pieces in my hands as I turned over the past in my mind. When I was 7, I'd gone to my father's office after school one November day. My father was clearly the best doctor within 1,000 miles of the small Ohio river town where we lived. He always astonished me and his patients by the things he could do. But on this day, when I was 7, my purpose was to see my best friend, Jimmy Hardesty. He hadn't been in school for 3 days, and his mother had sent word that she just might bring Jimmy in to see the doctor today. When the last of the afternoon's patients had gone, Jimmy had still not arrived. My father and I then went off to make house calls. As we started home, my father said suddenly, "Let's go up and check on old Jimmy." But when we came in sight of the old gray stone house, there was a light in the upstairs back window and another on the back porch, the ancient beacons of trouble. My father pulled the car right into the dooryard. Alice, Jimmy's older sister, came running out of the house and threw her arms around my father, crying and shaking and trying to talk. "Oh, Doc, Jimmy's dying. Dad's chasing all over the county looking for you. Thank goodness you're here." My father never ran. He used to say there was no good reason to hurry. If you had to hurry, it was too late. But he told Alice to let go of him, and he ran then. I followed him up the narrow, dark hall stairs. Jimmy was breathing very fast and made a high, airy sound. He looked all worn out and his skin glistened. His mother said, "Oh, Doc, help us. It was just a little cold. Then this afternoon, he started this terrible sweat." She stood behind me, both her hands on my shoulders, as my father listened to Jimmy's chest. He fixed a hypodermic and held the needle up to the light. I was certain that it was the miracle we must all have. My father gave Jimmy the shot. He then got a gauze pad from his black case and put it over Jimmy's mouth. He bent over him and began to breathe with him. No one moved in that room, and there was no other sound except the steady pushing of my father's breath and Jimmy's high, wheezing response. Then suddenly as lightning, there was the awful sound of my father's breathing alone. I felt Jimmy's mother's hands tighten on my shoulders and knew as she knew that something had snapped. But my father kept on breathing into Jimmy's lungs. After a long time, Mrs. Hardesty went over to the bed, put her hand on my father's arm, and said very quietly, "He's gone, Doc. Come away. My boy's not with us anymore." but my father would not move. Mrs. Hardesty took me by the hand, and we went down to the kitchen. I went out onto the porch and sat down on the top step in the cold darkness. I wanted no one to see me or hear me. When Mr. Hardesty came back and saw our car, he went into the house, and in a while I could hear voices, then silence, then voices again. At last my father came outside, and I followed him to the car. All the lonely way into town, he said nothing to me, and I could not risk saying anything to him. The world I thought I knew lay shattered in my heart. We didn't go home. We went to his office instead. He began going through his books, looking for something he might have done. I wanted to stop him, but I didn't know how. I couldn't imagine how the night would end. From time to time, all unwilling, I would begin to cry again. Finally, I heard someone at the door and went out through the reception room. My mother had come for us. She knelt down, hugged me, rubbed the back of my head, and I clung to her as I had not done since I was a baby. Oh, Mother, why couldn't he? Why couldn't he? I wept and lay my head against her shoulder. She rubbed my back until I was quiet. Then she said, "Your father is bigger than you are, but he's smaller than life. We love him for what he can do. We don't love him less for what he can't. Love accepts what it finds, no matter what." Even though I'm not certain I understood what she meant, I know I felt the importance of what she said. Then she went in to get my father. That winter seemed to have gone on forever when I lived through it long ago, but the memory played out in seconds. I sat turning over the pieces of Luke's broken toy. I said to him, "I can't fix it." "Sure you can." "No, I can't. I'm sorry." He looked at me and his expression of awesome confidence faded. His lower lip trembled, and he fought his tears, even as they came. I pulled him on my lap and comforted him as best I could in the sorrow over his broken toy and his fallen idol. I was certain he sensed my melancholy at seeing myself only an ordinary mortal in his eyes, because he stayed nestled against me for quite a time, his arm about my neck. As he left the room, giving me a direct and friendly look, I could hear my mother's voice telling me in her certain way that love was not conditional. Once the Son, now the Father. I knew absolutely that out of the anguish of that discovery came the first faint light of understanding. And God bless all of us as we attempt to understand our fathers, living or dead, and most important, ourselves.